I can't eat like a cow, but I do eat quite well, uncle. The girl brightly smiled, with breadcrumbs near her dainty lips. Yes, I can definitely see that. Bill laughed and started filling his tall glass with alcohol. Aren't you afraid? Of me? Bill scrunched his face to deliberately scare the child. The child simply stared at the man, not daring to avoid his eyes. No. You don't yell at me. You give me lots of good food. So I think you're a good person. What kind of life has this child been living? Bill thought, as he filled his glass of beer again. The letter said the child's mother abandoned her husband and child to elope with another man. The father of the child, who was heartbroken by the betrayal, became an alcohol addict and had died of alcohol poisoning. After that, the child grew up in the homes of her relatives, only left to be deserted by them. Even though the child had a pitiful past, Bill believed it was still absurd to raise her. Bill Remmer chugged down the glass of beer and decided that he will make his decision by next week. Did everyone hear? The gardener, Bill Remmer, has started to raise a young girl. A young maid hurriedly rushed into the lounge servants used during their free time. The servants who were taking their rest all turned their eyes toward the young maid, a girl. Mr. Remmer. It would be more plausible to say that he decided to raise a lion or an elephant instead. One of the servants snorted. The Herhart household's gardener, Bill Remmer, was a man who had a natural talent for growing flowers. Thanks to his talent, he has been able to maintain this position as a gardener for 20 years, even with his brusque temper. He was deeply trusted by the Earhart family, especially Norma. Due to Norma's unique love of flowers, she gave infinite understanding and tolerance to Bill's gardening and temper. It was also her decision to give the gardener a cabin in the woods, located behind the Herhart's mansion. Bill Remmer's life was simple. He worked in the garden and took a rest in the cabin. Despite his time drinking with his fellow workers, he spent most of his time surrounded by flowers and trees. Even after decades have passed, ever since his wife died of an illness, he did not get close to any woman. The Bill Remmer, raising a little girl. The servants who were resting in the lounge reached a consensus deeming that the rumor was nonsense, until one of the maids, sitting by the window, burst into an exclamation. Oh my, it must be true. Look over there. The maid pointed over the glass window with her eyes wide open. The servants all at once rushed over to the window, and soon became shocked with wonder. On the other side of the garden, Bill Remmer was gardening with his body crouched down, and the rumored petite girl was following his footsteps. The girl's golden hair, braided in one strand, shook back and forth like a pendulum as she trotted along. I still haven't made my decision. When there were questions asked about the child, Bill repeatedly answered the same response. I can't leave her here, so I need to think well. While Bill's thoughts continued through spring, then to summer, Layla Llewellyn was slowly settling down on the Earhart estate. The child's diligent stroll through the gardens and forests had already become a familiar scene for the Herhart servants. I think she's grown a bit. Mrs. Mona, the Herhart's chef, smiled while looking out the window. Layla was examining the grass and flowers that were beginning to bud behind the forest cabin. She's got a long way to go. She's still smaller than average girls. Look, Bill Remmer. Kids are different than your plants. They can't grow overnight. Mrs. Mona shook her head as she lowered her basket down on the table. What's this? Cookies and cake. There was a tea party yesterday at the mansion. I hate sweets, really. This is Layla's Bill Remmer's. Dark eyebrows wrinkled at Mrs. Mona's nonchalant response. This child was not meant to be here, and yet, the Duke's servants began to look after Layla every day. They greeted her, brought her food, and sometimes visited her. It was becoming troublesome for Bill Remmer. You should buy her some clothes. The young lady's skirt seems like it will go up to her knees. Mrs. Mona scared as she stared at Layla, running after a bird. Bill failed to refute. Even in his eyes, it seemed obvious that Layla was wearing clothes that didn't fit her. Oh my, look at her. Just when Mrs. Mona was about to leave, she suddenly pointed towards Layla and shouted in dismay. Bill glanced at where Mrs. Mona was looking towards with a queer look. When the bird Layla was chasing after landed on a tree branch, she started to swiftly climb up the tree. Her movements were athletic and light like a squirrel. She sure has a talent for climbing trees. Mrs. Mona scowled at Bill's unconcerned reply.